Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to talk about the Synology DS223j. Although we have a massive review incoming, I did want to do another much more short form review for those of you that are on the fence about whether to go for Synology's new affordable entry level 2-bay NAS solution. And in this video I'm going to give you 5 reasons why you might want to consider getting the DS223j for your modest storage needs, and 5 reasons why you might want to give it a big old miss. Let's crack on with number 1. Now, it may seem like probably the most obvious one, but I do think it's worth touching on. This is by far the lowest price point that you are ever going to pay to get into a meaningful DSM experience. It's not going to be fully featured, and I'd say you've only got access to about 70, maybe 75% of the apps. But what you do have access to in terms of apps and services on the DS223j is really impressive, given it's a quad-core ARM with a gig of memory. More on that later on. So even when you go into the storage area, you've got support of things like BTRFS, you've got support of Synology's hybrid RAID on there, and you've got support of snapshots on top of that. When you go into the App Center, yes, you've got access to all the usual applications that you're used to for backing up, and of course DSM as a whole. But once you go into the mainline packages there, you have access to pretty much the entirety of the collaboration suite. So you've got access to Synology Drive, you've got access to Synology Photos with AI recognition and facial recognition included in that. By the way, it's not turned off just because of it being an ARM-based NAS. You've also got surveillance station in here with a couple of licenses included. You've got Synology Chat, Synology Mail, Synology Office. All of those things are rolled in here within this system, and you get that included in with the package. Yes, you're not getting all of the applications, more on that later on, but I've got to say, in terms of access to DSM and its fully fledged features running surprisingly well on this modest box, you do get a lot packed in with the DS223j. Well, we can't keep talking about value without talking about the price. Right now, the DS223j knocks around, depending where you are in the world, for about $179 to about $189. And again, that's £187 currently at the time of recording, and €189 at the time of recording. For that 2-bay and Synology, again, that's the lowest price point right now for a Synology 2-bay without going second hand or going old generation. Indeed, despite the improvements in several key areas of hardware on this system and improvements in the way DSM 7.2 runs, this has still arrived at the same price point as the DS220j that arrived 3 years ago. So again, they've done an incredible job to maintain that price point. And yeah, it is a NAS, it is modest hardware, but whether you're going to be utilising it as a primary NAS or as an existing extension of your own 3-2-1 backup strategy, whether it is as a complete system backup from your larger NAS, or you're going to be using it for things like remote snapshot replication, at that price, that's incredibly attractive. And again, good value when you're looking at the full range of DSM appliances it arrives with support of. Next up, we alluded to it earlier on, but this device arrives with 1 gig of memory. Now, on the face of it, it's not a lot. It is just simply not a lot of memory. And it's surprising how well DSM runs on this with 1 gig of memory with that ARM-based processor. But what I will add is the previous devices before this in its series, the 218J, that 220J, the 216J, all of those devices arrive with half a gig of memory, 512 meg. Now, whether it is the cost of memory going up and down, whether it is DSM becoming more demanding, it's worth highlighting that right now, if you're weighing this up against the DS220j that might be going on special offer, saving yourself 10 or 20 quid, or you're considering upgrading from this or other J-series devices before it, it's worth remembering that this arrives with twice the memory of other J-series 2-bays that came before it. Next up, it's worth highlighting there is actually a particular subset of Synology NAS users that are going to find this very attractive, and that is those who want an incredibly low footprint NAS. Now, whether that's because you live in a mobile home, you live on a houseboat, or simply looking for a NAS that has the lowest impact in terms of noise, in terms of space, and in terms of energy consumption, this is pretty much the best you're going to get in a 2-bay that still includes a little bit of RAID recovery there. What do I mean? Well, even though it's got a 60-watt external PSU like the majority of Synology NASs out there, that 60-watt external PSU is there as a theoretical and needed maximum in the event of, and very rarely will you go anywhere close in terms of full power consumption on this. Realistically, if you look at their own reported power consumption, they rated it with a couple of 4TB drives inside at 16 watts active use and just 4 watts when the system was in idle. Then you can roll in with things like low power mode. You can run in with quiet mode. You can do scheduled on and off. You can even do wake on LAN, and all of that with a reported noise level with those two drives inside, if you go for lower non-pro drives, at 18.2 decibel recorded. What I mean is, this is an incredibly low footprint NAS, so not only is it low price, but you're barely going to notice it when it's running anyway. And lastly, and this is something a lot of users would write off on this, but I do think it's worth discussing, and I alluded to it earlier, is support of Synology Hybrid RAID, SHR. Now, for those that aren't aware, Synology Hybrid RAID allows you to mix and match drives. It allows you to use, you can go for an existing RAID, and they don't have to be all the same size drive, like a normal RAID requires you to do, capping you at the smallest available drive. Now, a number of you might say, well, it's a 2-bay. You can't even hot swap it. Like, right now, with that 2-bay device, SHR doesn't really have much meaning on this 2-bay system, given that you can't really swap out drives that easily, and with only 2 drives, you're not really taking advantage of the full scope of what SHR can be, which is when you might have a 4, a 6, an 8-bay device perhaps, and you partially populate it and you can add larger drives later. You're right, SHR might not be as appealing on this device when you get it. However, anyone that's utilised Synology NAS system for an extended period of time, that have eventually upgraded their system, generally, unless they want to go completely clean sweep, if their drives are running fine and the smart tests still say they're okay, people like to continue using those drives. Now, if you went for this device, this little 2-bay modest device in an SHR, and then 5, 7, 10 years down the line, you want to go for a bigger Synology NAS, on the assumption they're still around with everything else and NAS still is a thing, then in that case, you're going to have a much better and smoother job scaling up your storage if your original drives were in an SHR, because then you can physically remove those 2 drives and pop them in a 4-bay device like this, put those 2 drives in, and then this new system, which will then migrate your data and update the OS so you can carry on all of your pathways and stuff where you left off, but then the SHR will allow you to add the bigger drives. Whereas if this didn't have SHR and you had to go with a traditional RAID 1, the result would have been that you would have moved these 2 modest drives out of this modest system into your bigger system later on and be locked in the way RAID won't, traditional RAID won't let you use larger drives. So the inclusion of SHR on this 2-bay, although largely overlooked, does have its place if you really get into the Synology ecosystem and want to upgrade later. But perhaps you don't want to go into the Synology ecosystem. Maybe you're not sure. Let me give you the 5 reasons why you might want to sit on the fence and go for another NAS or a completely different brand entirely. Now, I'm going to be straight with you. The majority of the 5 points I'm going to talk about can all be largely put under the heading of they had to cut corners, or you are talking about modesty, or to stay within a certain value point. Ultimately, the downsides of this for a lot of users are going to be moderately obvious. The reason being that there's a reason this is cost effective and value and the entry point or the entry level system. But still, nonetheless, we should really go through them. And the first one is expandability on this. In terms of memory, is non-existent. That 1 gig, the minute you're running a lot of operations or you're running a lot of cameras, there's no way to upgrade the memory inside this. Inside there, the original memory is soldered to the board underneath that metal panel there, which also kind of aids as heat dissipation too. And the result is that not only can you not expand the storage with an expansion device, and you can't install, anything beyond those 2 drives, but you can't upgrade that memory. So over time, the more apps you run, or as DSM becomes a little beefier and a little hungrier, the result is that 1 gig of memory may end up serving you as a means of losing out in terms of features and functionality of DSM. But just bear that in mind. You cannot just solder on a new memory area on there. You can't just add a SODIMM module. 1 gig is all you're going to get. This next point, to be fair, we're not going to give too much hate on this for that, but it still arrives with 1 gigabit Ethernet there on the rear. Now I get it, it's an entry-level system. Synology's never really engaged with 2.5 gigabit Ethernet or 5 GBE out there, but there's still no denying that there are some users that are going to look at the 200 nickel price tag on this, give or take, and then when you roll in your drives, the fact that you can only get 109 megabytes per second network traffic when even the dullest and most domestic level hard drives will give you between 140 and 160 minimum megs each, and you're raiding them together, is going to be disheartening. The reason I bring it up, although we're not going to be too harsh on Synology not including greater than 1 GBE on a value series system, is if you think that is going to be a bottleneck, that might be a reason not to go for this and go for something a little beefier there. Yes, there are 2.5 GBE 2-bay affordable systems out there, not from Synology, you might want to look out there. But the reason I give Synology a little bit more stick on this, despite that lower price tag, which normally I'd sign them off on, is because they still are not allowing, let's find it here, the use of upgrades over USB. There's still no support of USB to 2.5G adapters or USB to 5G adapters, which at the very least would allow some users to be able to take advantage of those USB ports and add better network connectivity. Hell, they've removed pretty much all of their USB 1 GBE network adapters that might have allowed you to add a second LAN port there and maybe take advantage of SMB multi-channel or port trunking. So overall, just bear in mind that this value system will limit you to 1 gigabit network traffic. Now for this next point, it's worth hopping back over to the laptop here, because the DS223j has a really odd position when it comes to hard drive and SSD compatibility. Now, when you do look at the range of supported drives on this and you go to the third-party options, it's a very early thing, that kind of stands out to you if you spend even more than 10 seconds looking. And that is, not only do the hard drives only go as high for third-party drives up to just 14 TB, but there is only 7 WD drives listed on here, and there's only 8 Seagate drives listed on here, and there's a whopping, what are my notes, 36 Toshiba drives on here. So overall, that is not a vast amount of compatible drives with this rolling out the gate. Now, to be fair to Synology, they have to verify drives. It'd be very easy to say this one SATA drive works with all of their systems and not check, and then later on if someone gets litigious, that could be problematic. But still, nonetheless, that's not a lot of supported hard drives on their compatibility list. And for a value series device, when you're trying to find a bargain, the idea that there's only these 8 Seagate drives and only these 7 WD drives here with the non-Plus series drives, because not all of them are SMR, remember that, but more, it seems really odd to me that it's such a restricted compatibility listing there. And if you look at their own drives, of course, they're listing their own drives for 4 to 6 to 8 to 12 TB there. So overall, I'd say hard drive compatibility on the DS223j is a little odd here early doors. This may improve over time, and it may just be a question of Synology slowly but surely making their way through verification of more drives later on. We'll have to give them the benefit of the doubt. But still, nonetheless, this may annoy you for those of you that are looking at buying this drive and buying your drives at the same time, with the potential for those drives not to be on the official supported compatibility list. And staying here on screen, it's worth highlighting that, you may have heard great things about Synology's platform and the features that they do offer on there, but there's still no avoiding that because this is that ARM-based processor and it is a value series device, and it is great that they've rolled in a lot of different apps and services, a lot of the killer apps are just not going to be there. To put that into perspective, if we look at the App Center here, some of the apps that you are not going to see on the DS223j ever are ones like Active Backup, a phenomenal application which for many businesses is worth the price of admission as a fully fledged multi-platform single portal overview of your backups in across your network hardware environment there. Then on top of that, you've got things like the virtual machine support there, which allows you to take advantage of virtual environments of OSs. Ignore it says repair. It's because we've updated to DSM 7.2 on this, and we're still waiting to update all of the individual apps over time. Then you've got things such as their range of maximum cameras in surveillance station, with more prosumer and Intel powered devices here giving you between 25 and 40 cameras, where on the value series devices they generally cap out about 12 to 15 cameras. Then when you look at things like Plex Media Server and even their own native video station application, you're not going to have support of hardware transcoding natively. That CPU does have 4K playback and very light conversion support. When it comes to Plex Media Server, you're going to hit something of a wall overall. What I'm saying is, if you go for the value series NAS there, you are going to miss out on certain key and attractive elements in Synology's platform because you are going as a value tier and you're not getting the full experience. And again, we haven't even talked about on DSM 7.2 support of things like write once read many support, worm for immutable backups, and volume encryption. Neither of these, although DSM 7.2 is available on the DS223j, are possible on this NAS. And finally, I alluded to this earlier on, but expandability just generally and scalability and upgradability on this NAS is significantly lower in terms of glass ceiling than on most other NAS devices in their portfolio. I already mentioned earlier on that this doesn't support hot swapping. You can't just, in the event of a RAID issue, you can't just pop a drive out and stick in another one. You have to power down the device in its RAID degraded state, which some users not a big fan of there. Another thing it doesn't have, as mentioned, there is no expansion slot. There's no eSATA port there to attach the Synology DX517. So the two bays, it's as big as it's ever going to get. And the minute you start maxing out that storage, remember, you're in that RAID 1. So you're going to have to gradually replace drives. And it's just going to be problematic in a way that expandability and larger bay numbers are available on some of the other Synology NAS systems there. We already talked about the lack of memory upgradability on this, but another thing we didn't talk about is this is one of the now decreasing number of Synology NAS solutions that doesn't have M2 NVMe bays on the base. So yes, it's an ARM-based processor, so there is an argument that you wouldn't be able to capitalize on those, and indeed there may not even been the lanes available to the CPU and the chipset that would allow you to really take advantage of M2s, but still nonetheless, you just bear in mind that you may have heard great things about Synology caching and indeed M2 NVMe storage pools. They are not going to be a thing on this. This device, when you get it out of the box, expandability is virtually nil. Above and beyond just adding larger drives periodically and refreshing the RAID later, that's all you've got on this. And ultimately, this value series box at the start, as your entry point moving away from the cloud, may be very, very attractive when you're moving away from Google Drive, Dropbox and the like. But it's just worth bearing in mind that as soon as you start getting to grips with it, and as soon as you start really enjoying it, that glass ceiling is going to come down pretty darn hard. So as a first entry into Synology's ecosystem, it's great. But if you are looking for a firmer and more established foot into Synology's ecosystem, it might be worth going for a device perhaps a couple of times more expensive. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video on the should you buy for the Synology DS223j. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. The review, it will come. I just wanted to get one of the short before you buys out first. Let me know what you think in the comments. There should be a link in the description to other videos and articles on this NAS and other Synology solutions. If you're still on the fence about which Synology hardware solution you need, or whether indeed Synology is the brand for you, then do use the free advice section, the big blue button on the right hand side of the screen on every NAS Compare page, or use our free community support forum, Ask NAS Compares, or the Discord, where we can answer your questions for you. Apart from that, thank you so much for watching. If you're going to buy from Amazon, B&H, Newegg and the like, please use the links in the description to take you there. It costs you nothing extra, and it helps you support content creators like us, because we get a kickback from anything, and I mean anything you buy. It's just me and Eddie here. It really helps us out. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.